Hi there, it's Jeanette. Welcome to day 3 of my Christmas series for 2017. Today I have an insert from my December daily album that I want to share with you. It features a new stamp from WHIMSY Stamps. The image is called Penguin Christmas Sweetheart, and you can see how adorable he is here holding his little candy canes in the shape of a heart. So I'm going to take you through how I created this project. I colored the image with Copic markers, so I'll be sharing the coloration process with you. I'll share with you how I created that background using Distress inks, and I'll share with you how I grounded that penguin on the snowbank. So the first thing I did was I took some Memento Tuxedo black ink and I stamped the image onto some Neenah cardstock. Both these, the paper and the ink, work very well with Copic markers. And I'm using the Cool Gray series to color up the penguin. So using some darker markers for the body, or I guess I would say the darker part of the penguin. And I work in small little areas. It just facilitates the blending process. So I lay down my light marker, I add a little bit of shadow with the mid-tone, and then I complete that shadow with this darker marker. And then I work in reverse. I blend the darker marker with my mid marker and then complete the blend with my lightest marker. And in that way I get a really nice graduated blend. There's no lines and it looks really natural. And you can go in and add a little bit more of that mid-tone if you need to. Because this is such a tiny area, I'm just starting with my darkest marker, putting down a little bit of my mid and then blending with the light. That way my marker isn't going to bleed anywhere. So for these tiny little areas, that's how I'm working. I'm just starting with my darkest marker and working fairly quickly to make sure that the marker doesn't dry. When I work with the larger areas, I do start with that lighter marker. It just helps me visualize where my highlight is going to be. And it's much easier to add some darkness to an area than to try to take away too much darkness with the Copic markers. So you can see how I'm just putting the shadows in there. I did get a little bit of that marker on his foot, so right away I took my blending pen or my colorless blender and I just pushed that ink back into the dark part. I'm going to work on this final part of the darkest area of his body here. It's a little bit out of screen, but you can see that I'm just doing the blending in the exact same way. I'm leaving a little bit of a highlight there on the bottom part of his arm, just so that it's different from the rest of his body, so that it won't sort of all blend into one. I think you can see what I mean now. You can see that sort of band of lightness. That way it sort of sits on top of his body. Now for the rest of him, the front of his face and his little tummy, I'll be using these markers, which are obviously quite light. The blender actually has no color in it at all. And I'm just putting a little bit down just to add a little bit of contrast, just to make it look less flat, and just blending any of the marker edges with my colorless blender. So now I'm going to be working on his hat, and the marker numbers that I used are right here. And you can see I actually have 4. So I have 3 red colors, so a light, a mid, and a dark. And then it just wasn't dark enough, so I went in with some dark green, which sounds really odd, but when you see it being laid down, you'll understand why. It really adds a really great shadow and really makes his hat come to life. So right now I'm just working with that mid-tone, and I am putting a little bit of my light color there to just sort of blend it. Now I'm adding my darkest red here, going over those dark areas where all the shadows are going to be. And then I'm taking that green pen and just in the very darkest areas I'm adding some of that green pen, and you can see it just ends up looking like a deep shadow on the hat. And once I blend it with the darkest red, it will not look green at all. It's going to look great. I know right now it looks a bit strange, but here you can see I'm blending it with that red pen, and it just ends up looking like a deep shadow. So I think if you really want to have a high contrast coloration, you really want something to look very rich and vibrant, think about adding like a different color like that. Sometimes it really is what does the trick. So now I'm just blending with my mid-tone, and then I'll complete all the blending after I've put the mid-tone down here, just going around some of the edges. Then those areas that are left white are what I'm going to blend my lightest color with. And you can see how now that hat looks really like there's a lot of folds. It looks plush, it looks soft, and that was exactly the look I was going for. I'm just outlining the entire edge of each candy cane with gray, and I'm going to let that dry for a little bit. Just dabbed some of my colorless blender on the edges so it wasn't too stark, and we'll work on that candy cane once that's all dry. Right now we're going to work on the beak and his little feet. So I'm working with the markers I would say that are more yellow, and then that mid color that I'm using is more orange. And you can see that gives a really nice look to the beak and the feet. And I did cut out part of that coloration just because my video was getting quite long. I did want to share this part of the candy cane, so once it was all dry, you can see I'm just scribbling in the lines, starting at the outer edge on each side and scribbling inwards, and leaving a little bit of the middle uncolored, and that gives a highlight. So it makes the candy canes look like they're rounded, and it makes them look more lifelike. So now we're going to work on the, I guess, the hat cuff and the little pom-pom. Oh, first I'm adding little highlights to his eyes with a gel pen. Now we're going to work on the pom-pom. So I'm using, again, cool gray markers. I'm using C1, C00, and C3. And I'm just sort of mapping out where I want my shadows to be. So I want it to look like it's folded a little bit, and I'm adding dots just to make it look like it's fuzzy. So I'm just adding tiny little dots. Some are bigger than others. They're not all uniform. Don't overthink it when you're doing this. Just sort of establish where you want your folds to be, and then just dab over with the colors. So just dot, dot, dot everywhere, and it sort of blends together a little bit. If you feel like you've lost a little bit of your shadows, you can go in and add some more with your dark marker, and then just slightly blend them again, and you get that sort of fuzzy look. And I'll do the same thing for the pom-pom. So where I want my shadows to be, that's where I'm going to concentrate the dots, and that's where I'm going to put the darkest dots. And then I did go in with that white gel pen again and add some white sort of highlights over top. That just gives another layer, another bit of contrast. So now I'm going to mask my image. So I'm using a very light ink. I think this was, I can't remember what the name of the Memento ink was. I'll leave it in the product list below. So I created my mask. I did die cut it with the nested hand-stitched rectangles from WHIMSY. It was the second largest die, and I'm going to use a landscape die to create a landscape mask. So you'll see that in a minute. Right now I'm just putting the masks on. So that's a mask I created with that landscape die. Made sure to burnish it with my bone folder so it stays down. And now I'm using a series of distress inks. Now this color combination I saw on Christina Werner's blog. She used this for one of her cards to create a background, like a starry background, and so these are her colors that she used. I thought they were so beautiful, I decided to use them as well because they really blend nicely together. So I had my, I can't can't remember the first one. Picked Raspberry was that pink one. This is Seedless Preserves I'm adding. So just gradually add your color. You can work up to the intensity you want. Now this is Chipped Sapphire, so that's going to start covering from the top down. And I am just putting a little piece of paper over the mask there so I don't get ink all over my fingers. And then, you know, you transfer it everywhere if you do that. So just blending until it looks really soft and diffuse. And then a little bit of black soot there at the top. And now you're able to peel the masks off, and it's like the big moment, the big reveal. It is always very exciting to see what the image looks like once you put that background down. So I think that looks phenomenal. I just love that color palette that she used. Now I'm going to ground that penguin so that it looks like he's sitting on that snow. I'm creating a shadow, so I traced right around the penguin with that dark C3 color. Now I'm blending right over top of that with my C1. And then I'm taking my blender pen and I'm really blending those edges, making them nice and diffuse, and that adds a great shadow, so it really makes it look like he's sitting on that snowbank. So you can see I worked quite a bit to make sure that everything was blended and there was no lines. Now to create the cheeks, I'm using a little bit of chalk on a soft paintbrush and just sort of pouncing that cheek color on. It's nice and soft, and I think that's a great look. It sort of makes his cheeks look like they're glowing a little bit. And now I'll add all those little stars. So I'm using that white gel pen again and just dotting over the entire surface. And you can see that I'm adding some large dots and then a little spattering of tiny dots and then a large dot just randomly. But if you vary the size of the dots, it looks much nicer. So I'll just keep going until that entire background is covered in dots. I did redot his eyes so that you could see the highlight a bit better. And then I took some foil paper and die cut the word celebrate out. This is also from Whimsy, and that foil paper matched my background exactly, so I was pretty excited about that. I'm adding some zig glue to the back of that. I'll position it and hold a mountain block over it while it dries, and it's all done. It's all finished. I'm really pleased with it. I hope you enjoyed watching me create this little project. It'll be going into my December daily album. For a full list of supplies and links, you can find those below this video on YouTube, or you can check my blog. Thanks for watching.